Everyone on the block saw the sedan before they saw the woman. Engine revving, tinted windows hiding the men inside. 4 of them cruised like they owned the street. People stepped back, cars slowed. No one wanted to be in their way. Then their attention shifted to a young woman stepping out of a large cargo van. Alone. Quiet. Focused. Too focused to notice the danger closing in behind her. The sedan boxed her van in seconds, forming a trap she couldn't escape. Their smirks widened, their voices sharpened. One reached for her door, another stepped forward, blocking her path. She tried to stay calm, but fear had already crept into her eyes. The men thought she was helpless. They thought she was alone. They thought she couldn't fight back. But the men made one deadly mistake. They didn't look at the back of the van, because inside that van were 3 elite police dogs trained for high-risk missions. And the moment the men tried to touch her, those dogs stepped out and showed a level of discipline no criminal could ever prepare for. What those dogs did next left everyone shocked. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The late afternoon glow cast long shadows across the warehouse district as Maya tightened her gloves and stepped out of her van. It was supposed to be a simple transport day. Pick up the 3 K9s from the training facility, deliver them to the city's nighttime demonstration event, and return before dark. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Just another long drive with the dogs she trusted more than most humans. She walked around the van, checking the latches, the tires, the temperature controls in the K9 compartment. Everything was perfect. The dogs inside, Zeus, Phantom, and Fury, watched her through the mesh grate, tails thumping lightly. They knew the routine as well as she did. Maya slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, humming along with the low rumble. She loved her job. Not because it paid well, it didn't. She loved it because it meant protecting the animals who protected everyone else. These weren't regular dogs. They were elite police canines trained to detect explosives, chase down fugitives, and disarm threats with unbelievable precision. She admired them, respected them, and she drove for them with pride, knowing each mission they completed saved lives. But halfway down the freeway, her rearview mirror caught something unusual. A menacing sedan, 4, maybe 5 guys inside, riding in a tight formation behind her. Dark hoodies, heavy boots, a chrome bumper glinting in the sun. At first, she ignored them. Cars traveled in groups. It wasn't unusual, but they weren't passing her. They weren't turning off. They were staying directly behind her van, matching her speed perfectly. A knot tightened in her stomach. She brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were heading the same way. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. At the next stoplight, she glanced again. The sedan had pulled up beside her van, 2 men in the back staring intently. Her heart thumped once, hard. She kept her hands on the wheel. Stay calm. Don't assume the worst. People looked at her van all the time, mostly curious about the K9 unit decals. But then, one man in the passenger seat tapped the window, pointing directly at the back compartment. Her blood chilled. Inside the van, the dogs sensed it instantly. Zeus shifted, ears up. Phantom let out a low rumble. Fury paced, restless. They never reacted like this unless something felt wrong. Maya swallowed. She told herself it was nothing. But deep down she knew this day wasn't going to stay routine for long. Maya pulled into a deserted alley to double-check her delivery schedule, finally shaking off the uneasy feeling in her chest. The area was quiet, too quiet. No pedestrians, no workers, just rows of brick buildings and the soft rumble of her van cooling down. She stepped out, phone in hand, scrolling through the route confirmation. Everything seemed normal, but a low vibration in the ground made her look up. The sound grew louder. An engine. A powerful engine. Her pulse quickened as the same sedan turned the corner, roaring into the alley like a pack of wolves finding their prey. She pretended not to notice them, walking toward the passenger side of the van. But the sedan didn't pass by. It slowed, circling. The car parked directly in front of her bumper. Another car cut behind her, blocking her exit. Their boots hit the asphalt as 4 of them stepped out, exchanging smirks like they'd been waiting for this moment. Maya inhaled slowly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to sound firm, not intimidated. They said nothing, just stared at her like she was a challenge they planned to enjoy. Inside the K9 compartment, Zeus shifted his weight, nose pressed to the vent as he sniffed the tension in the air. Phantom stood still, muscles tight. Fury let out a warning growl that vibrated through the van walls. The dogs sensed danger long before humans did, and this time their instincts were screaming. Maya touched the latch lightly, calming them with her presence. "Easy," she whispered. "I'm fine." But even she didn't believe her own words. One man, tall with a jagged tattoo on his cheek, stepped closer. "Nice van," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. His eyes slowly traveled across the K9 decals. "So, you're hauling dogs? Police dogs? Or are those stickers just for show?" Maya stiffened. She didn't want conflict. She just needed to leave. "I'm working," she said firmly. "Let me pass." The tattooed man smirked, tapping her door. "Relax. We're just being friendly." Friendly wasn't how they looked. A second man walked around to the back of the van, running his fingers along the latch as if inspecting it. Maya stepped quickly between him and the compartment, blocking his hand. "Don't touch that," she warned, her voice sharpening. The man chuckled darkly. "What, sensitive cargo?" Inside, the dogs erupted. 3 synchronized barks that struck the air like thunder. The men jerked back, startled. Maya didn't know which scared her more, the men's intentions or the fact that the dogs only reacted like this when something was truly, dangerously wrong. The growls inside the van deepened, vibrating through the steel walls like a warning drum. Zeus's nails scratched lightly against the metal floor as he stepped forward, nose pushing between the bars. Phantom's ears were pinned, body stiff as stone. Fury's tail was low, eyes locked on the silhouettes outside. These weren't the restless movements of bored dogs. These were reactions born from instinct, training, and the unmistakable scent of danger. Maya felt the shift immediately. She had worked with these dogs long enough to understand one thing. When all 3 reacted together, it was never a false alarm. One man leaned closer, peering into the darkened compartment vents. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he teased. "Your puppy's scared?" His tone was mocking, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Even hardened men felt something primal stir when police canines stared them down. Maya stepped forward, blocking his view, shoulders squared. "Back away from the van," she said firmly. She tried to keep her voice level, but the dog's agitation was contagious, turning her nerves into sharp edges. The tattooed man laughed, stepping closer, his boots echoing on the pavement. "Relax, girl. We're not doing anything." His grin said the opposite. He reached out again, this time touching her arm lightly, but enough to make every muscle in her body tighten. The contact lasted less than a second. The dogs reacted instantly. 3 explosive barks, sharp, clipped, and aggressive, burst from the compartment like detonations. The metal frame rattled. Even the tattooed man flinched, jerking his hand back as Maya stepped away, her heartbeat racing. The dogs weren't just barking. They were communicating. Zeus's bark was short and commanding, the one he used when detecting an immediate threat. Phantom's was lower, a warning of potential violence. Fury's had an unmistakable edge, a readiness to act. Maya felt a cold wave run down her arms. She had seen these reactions during high-risk training simulations when officers pretended to be armed suspects. These dogs weren't confused. They weren't mistaken. They sensed aggression. They sensed intent. And they sensed it from the men standing in front of her. One man whispered to another, "Why are they reacting like that?" The other shrugged, but his confidence cracked. He glanced at Maya, then at the van, suddenly less certain. But instead of backing off, the tattooed leader stepped even closer, testing boundaries. "They're just dogs," he said. "Animals react to anything." Maya shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "Not these dogs." And for the first time, she realized if the men pushed even one step further, the dog's instincts wouldn't just warn her, they would protect her. No matter what happened next, the tattooed man's smirk widened as he stepped even closer, invading Maya's space with the confidence of someone who believed nothing could touch him. The rumble of the sedan behind him echoed through the empty alley like a threat wrapped in steel and gasoline. "You know," he said, tilting his head, "for a girl driving a big van, you sure look nervous." His eyes flicked over her shoulder toward the K9 compartment. "What are you hiding back there? Something valuable?" Maya felt heat rise in her chest. "Back away," she repeated, firmer this time. But he didn't flinch. He just chuckled, reaching for the back latch again, as if testing how far he could push before she snapped. She moved quickly, placing her body between him and the latch. "Don't touch the van," she said. No shake in her voice now. "Just steel." The man raised an eyebrow, amused. "Why? Because your mutts will get upset?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Let's see how loyal they really are." Maya's breath hitched. The dogs sensed the escalation instantly. Zeus growled, a deep, commanding rumble that made the man's grin falter for a split second, but pride overpowered caution, and he scoffed. "They're behind a door. What are they going to do?" Inside, Phantom's pacing intensified. Fury's claws scratched the floor, not in panic, but in readiness. Maya's instincts flared. She knew these dogs. She knew how they reacted to danger. And she knew they were seconds away from entering full protection mode. But the man didn't care about warnings or danger signs. He wanted control. He wanted to intimidate her. So he took one more step forward, jabbed a finger at her chest, and said, "Move. I want to see what's in the van." The world snapped into silence. Maya didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She simply said, "If you touch that door again, you won't like what happens next." Her voice was low. Calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes before a storm. Behind her, Zeus released another sharp bark, loud enough to echo between buildings. The man jerked back a step, startled despite himself. His friends muttered behind him, shifting uneasily. One whispered, "Dude, those aren't regular dogs." The leader clenched his jaw, embarrassment spreading across his face. He hated losing control, so he pointed at the latch again. "Open it," he ordered. "Let's see these police dogs you're so proud of." Maya tightened her grip on the door handle. He had crossed the line. And the dogs, already positioned to defend, were seconds away from showing these men exactly what real training looked like. Maya's fingers hovered over the latch, her pulse pounding in her ears. Zeus, Phantom, and Fury were pressed against the grate inside, their bodies taut, their breathing sharp and focused. They weren't panicking. They were waiting, waiting for her signal, waiting for permission to protect. The tattooed man took another bold step forward, raising his hand as if to shove her aside. That was it. That was the moment the last line snapped. Maya inhaled once, steady and controlled, then gave a command she rarely used outside of training. "Stand by." 3 silhouettes inside the compartment froze instantly. The alley felt unnervingly silent. Even the men seemed confused by the sudden shift in energy. Zeus's growl deepened. Phantom's ears locked forward, every muscle coiled. Fury's tail stiffened behind him in perfect alignment. The dogs weren't just reacting, they were preparing for a synchronized formation. The tattooed man scoffed. "What, are you calling for backup?" he taunted. "They're still locked inside." Maya didn't answer. Instead, she lifted the latch with a sharp click. The door swung open and the world changed. All 3 dogs burst out, not wildly, not unpredictably, but with flawless precision. They moved around Maya in a smooth, practiced arc, forming a protective triangle. Zeus at the front, Phantom to the left, Fury to the right. Their bodies were low, strong, ready. Their positioning wasn't random. It was the same formation used during SWAT extractions, the kind of formation designed to shield a handler from weapons, threats, or assault. The men froze. For the first time, fear cracked through the leader's expression. "What the?" he muttered, stumbling 1 step back. Zeus responded with a single, thunderous bark that echoed against the brick walls. Phantom and Fury joined him with perfectly timed barks that struck the air like coordinated shock waves. The dogs didn't charge. They didn't bite. They simply stood their ground with unwavering dominance, eyes locked on every man who dared to move. People underestimate trained canines until they witness discipline like this. The leader lifted his hand slightly. "Hey now, calm down," he said, his voice losing its swagger. Phantom took 1 step forward, just enough to make the man stop breathing. Fury mirrored the movement, tracking another man who tried inching to the side. Every attempted shift, every twitch, every breath from the men triggered an immediate recalibration from the dogs. Maya stood behind them, her fear replaced with something stronger. "Control. These dogs aren't here to scare you," she said quietly, her voice steady. "They're here to protect me." And now, with the dogs standing like a living fortress around her, the men finally understood. This wasn't a woman they could intimidate. This was a handler with 3 elite warriors at her side. The alley felt tighter now, as if the empty air itself realized danger was closing in. The 3 dogs stood like a living barricade, chests firm, ears up, eyes burning with disciplined intensity. Zeus's gaze never broke from the tattooed man. Phantom's head tracked every micro-movement of the men on the left. Fury's body angled just enough to shield Maya's legs, ready to react before she even felt threatened. The formation wasn't just instinct. It was drilled into them through hundreds of hours of high-risk training, and the men could feel it. Every second that passed made their bravado shrink. The tattooed leader swallowed hard, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "They're well-trained," he muttered, stepping back 1/2 inch. But pride pushed him forward again. "Doesn't matter. Dogs are dogs," he spat to the side, pretending not to be intimidated. Yet his eyes betrayed him, constantly darting between Zeus's bared teeth and Phantom's laser-focused stare. Maya didn't move. She didn't need to. The dogs spoke louder than anything she could say. One of the younger men shifted nervously, edging toward the side of the van as if trying to circle behind her. Fury picked up the movement instantly, his head snapping to the right, body lowering, muscles tightening like a pulled wire. The man froze, hands lifted, fear flooding his expression. Okay, he whispered, backing away. Phantom repositioned smoothly, keeping Maya's flank covered. Zeus remained front and center, waiting for Maya's next command. Every motion was sharp, calculated, and perfectly synchronized. Proof these dogs weren't acting on emotion, but on precise tactical coordination. The leader tried again to regain control. "Relax," he said to the others, though his voice cracked under the strain. "They're bluffing. She won't let them do anything." His attempt at confidence faltered when Zeus released a low, rolling growl, the kind that vibrated through bone more than air. The leader's shoulders tensed, and he stepped backward despite himself. The dogs advanced by a single coordinated stride, never breaking formation. A heavy quiet settled over the alley. The men no longer smirked. No more mocking comments. Just the uncomfortable realization that they had cornered someone who wasn't alone, and whose protectors were far beyond their control. Maya felt the shift, too. Fear no longer coiled in her stomach. She had 3 guardians at her side, 3 partners who could read danger faster than any human ever could. She looked at the leader calmly. "You're done here," she said. But the leader wasn't done. His pride wouldn't let him walk away. And in the next moment, he would make the one decision that pushed this confrontation past the point of no return. The tattooed leader clenched his jaw, muscles twitching with humiliation. He hated being challenged, especially by someone he underestimated. His eyes flicked between Maya and the dogs, and something cold hardened in his expression. "You think these animals scare me?" he growled, taking a threatening step forward. Zeus responded immediately, placing one paw ahead, muscles rippling under his coat. Phantom mirrored him, lowering his head. Fury shifted sideways, tightening the formation. The air grew electric, thick with the promise of violence. One of the men, trying to prove something to his leader, yanked a heavy tire iron from the trunk of their car with a sharp clatter. It hit the ground like a weapon being unsheathed. The sound sliced through the silence, and the dogs reacted in perfect unison. 3 simultaneous growls, deep and warning, vibrating through the pavement. Maya's breath hitched. A tire iron wasn't just intimidation. It was used to threaten, to strike, to control, and every K9 in the world was trained to recognize it as a weapon. Phantom's paws spread slightly, adjusting for power. Zeus's chest expanded as he inhaled sharply, ready to move. Fury shifted closer to Maya's leg, shielding her with unwavering loyalty. The man twirled the tire iron once, its metallic echo dancing through the alley. "Back off," he barked. "Call them off, or someone gets hurt." Maya didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she said the one command that told the dogs exactly what she needed without escalating the situation. "Hold." The dogs froze instantly, but hold didn't mean calm. It meant controlled tension. It meant be ready to strike without launching first. It meant wait for the threat to make the mistake. The man with the tire iron stepped forward, convinced her stillness meant weakness. "See, they're just dogs," he sneered, raising the iron higher. Zeus's eyes narrowed. Phantom took in every angle. Fury tracked the man's wrist with surgical precision. The tattooed leader watched too, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of fear that passed over his features. "Don't push it," he warned his friend quietly. But the younger man ignored him, adrenaline drowning out common sense. He swung the tire iron. It never landed. Zeus's bark exploded like a gunshot, timed perfectly to shock and disorient. At the exact same instant, Phantom lunged one step forward, not attacking, but cutting off the trajectory. Fury's snarl ripped through the air, a sound that made every man stumble backward. The tire iron slipped from the man's hand. He froze. Everyone froze. The dogs didn't touch him. They didn't need to. Their message was unmistakable. One more move, one wrong step, and the men would learn what real danger truly looked like. For a long, breathless second, no one moved. The metal tire iron lay on the pavement, heavy and menacing. Its sharp clatter still echoed in the tense silence. The man who had swung it stood frozen, arms suspended uselessly in midair, his face drained of color. Zeus's single step forward had stopped him cold. Phantom's precision block had redirected the danger in a split second. Fury's growl still vibrated through the alley, low and controlled. The dogs hadn't attacked. They hadn't even touched him. But every person watching knew if they had wanted to, that tire iron wouldn't have gotten anywhere near Maya. The tattooed leader cursed under his breath, anger trembling beneath his fear. "They're trained," he muttered, almost to himself. "Too trained." His eyes darted from Zeus's steady stance to Phantom's razor-sharp focus. He finally understood he wasn't looking at pets. He was looking at officers with instincts sharper than knives and discipline deeper than bone. The man with the tire iron tried to step back, but he moved too quickly. Zeus reacted instantly. He surged forward, not to bite, but to block, his shoulder slamming into the man's thigh with calculated force. The move was controlled, deliberate, and perfectly aimed to destabilize without causing permanent harm. The man stumbled backward and fell, the breath knocked out of him. Phantom and Fury repositioned the moment Zeus moved, flanking the others with flawless coordination, ensuring no one got behind Maya. People who had gathered at the far end of the alley gasped. One woman whispered, "That's SWAT-level training." Another man recorded in disbelief, his camera trembling in his hands. The dogs' formation shifted slightly, adapting to the new angles, adjusting pressure and coverage points like a tactical team in motion. The fallen man scrambled backward on his hands, panic overtaking bravado. "Get them away!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Zeus stood over him, not touching, not attacking, just staring with a dominance so intense the man couldn't hold his eye contact. Maya stepped forward with calm authority, stopping just beside her lead dog. "They warned you," she said softly. Fury's ears flicked back, listening to her tone. Zeus's breathing slowed. Phantom's muscles eased just enough to show they were still in control of every second. The tattooed leader raised his hands, trying to steady his breath. "Call them off," he demanded, but his voice wasn't confident anymore. It was pleading. Maya didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, the men seemed to realize how badly they had misjudged her. These weren't just trained dogs. They were professionals, and they had just demonstrated the kind of controlled force that only true police canines could deliver. The tattooed leader opened his mouth to argue again, but a distant sound cut through the tension. A sharp, rising wail echoing down the industrial street. Sirens, multiple sirens. The men's heads snapped toward the intersection at the far end of the block. Blue and red lights flickered against the brick warehouse walls, growing brighter with every passing second. Someone had called for help. Someone watching from the safety of distance had dialed 911 the moment the confrontation escalated. And now, backup was arriving fast. The leader's jaw clenched. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. The younger men shuffled nervously, glancing at each other as the sound closed in. Zeus shifted position, eyes still locked on the group, but ears turning toward the approaching squad cars. Phantom and Fury held their formation, bodies firm, ready for anything. Maya didn't flinch. She kept her stance grounded, steady, as if the sirens were the final confirmation that things were finally tilting in her favor. The first patrol car swung into the alley, tires screeching as it came to a stop. A second car followed, then a third, boxing in the entire area. Officers stepped out with hands near their holsters, assessing the scene. The dogs, standing in tactical precision, caught their attention immediately. Zeus didn't growl. Phantom didn't bark. Fury didn't twitch. All three simply held their positions, demonstrating the unmistakable posture of working K9s awaiting orders. One officer's eyes widened. "Are those federal K9 units?" he whispered to his partner. Another officer nodded slowly, recognizing Zeus's badge tag. "That's Zeus. He's one of the top dogs from the Interstate Tactical Team." The police suddenly understood why the men looked terrified, and why the woman standing behind the dogs looked so composed. "Hands where we can see them," an officer commanded. The men jerked their hands up immediately, fear overriding ego. The tattooed leader hesitated a fraction too long, and Zeus's growl deepened, just enough to make the man flinch and snap his hands into the air. Officers approached cautiously, eyes shifting between the heavily trained dogs and the agitated men. One officer called out to Maya, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She gave a small nod, keeping her voice steady. "I'm fine. They tried to block me in and threaten me." The officers exchanged glances. They could already tell she was telling the truth. No one stood calmly behind three elite K9s unless they were clearly the victim. The tattooed man tried one last defense. "They attacked us," he yelled. But Zeus, Phantom, and Fury didn't need words. Their discipline, their restraint, and their perfect formation told the officers everything they needed to know. The moment the officers stepped closer, the tattooed leader pointed at Maya with a shaky hand. "She set those dogs on us," he shouted, desperation leaking through the cracks in his voice. "We were just talking to her, and she let them attack us." His words tumbled over each other, wild and frantic. The younger men nodded rapidly, eager to cling to any story that might save them. One of them even clutched at his leg dramatically, though the dogs had never touched him. Their lies echoed through the alley, but the officers didn't look convinced. An officer glanced at Zeus, Phantom, and Fury. Still steady, still silent, still standing in disciplined formation. "These dogs don't look like they attacked anyone," he said. Another officer stepped closer to the fallen tire iron on the ground, nudging it with his boot. "Whose is this?" he asked. None of the men answered, their eyes darting away. The silence spoke louder than any confession. Maya folded her arms, finally able to breathe. She didn't even need to argue. Reality was standing right in front of everyone. "Check the security cameras," Maya said, nodding toward a warehouse corner where a small camera blinked. The officer followed her gaze. "Good idea," he said. Another officer radioed dispatch, asking for access to the building's live feed. Within minutes, a supervisor stepped out of a patrol car holding a tablet. He tapped the screen, his brows raising as footage flickered to life. The officers formed a semicircle around him. The men held their breath. The video was painfully clear. The men circling her van, the tire iron being pulled out, the leader grabbing her arm, Maya stepping back defensively, the dogs remaining inside until the very last second. No bites, no lunges, just textbook K9 protection. The truth was right there. Undeniable. The tattooed leader's shoulders slumped as the officers watched, their expressions hardening. One officer turned the tablet toward him. "You sure you want to keep lying?" he asked. The man swallowed, his face draining of color. The younger men shifted uneasily, now understanding their lies had nowhere left to hide. "You harassed her," the officer said firmly. "You escalated. You drew a weapon, and she showed remarkable restraint." He gestured to the dogs. "Frankly, it looks like they showed more restraint than any of you." Zeus kept his gaze locked on the leader, his posture unwavering. Phantom's ears flicked, listening to every word. Fury's stance softened slightly, sensing the shift in control. The men had come expecting an easy target. Instead, they found themselves exposed, cornered, and outnumbered by nothing more than the truth and 3 dogs whose discipline shamed them more than any accusation ever could. The officers tightened the perimeter as the men stood in stunned silence, their earlier confidence evaporating like smoke. Zeus remained at the front of the formation, breathing steady, gaze unbroken. Phantom and Fury flanked him with perfect symmetry, their discipline almost unsettling to watch. One of the senior officers stepped forward, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, the kind of man who had seen enough chaos to know it when he saw it. He approached slowly, lowering his voice when he reached Maya. "These dogs, they're not regular canines, are they?" he asked. Maya shook her head. "They're part of the Interstate Tactical Program." The officer exhaled sharply, turning toward the men with a hardened stare. That explains it. He stepped closer to the group of trembling men. "Do you even know who you were messing with?" His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of authority. The tattooed leader stiffened, trying to hold on to whatever pride he had left. The officer pointed at Zeus. "That dog alone has been deployed in over 30 high-risk operations. Armed suspects, barricaded buildings, hostage rescues." Zeus's ears twitched, as if he recognized his own resume. The officer continued. "Phantom, explosive specialist. He's identified threats faster than machines in airports." Phantom's posture stayed dignified, his eyes focused as if confirming every word. "And Fury," the officer paused, shaking his head with a faint, respectful smile. "Fury is certified in advanced disarm maneuvers. He's taken weapons away from criminals who didn't even see him move." The men stared at the dogs as though seeing them for the first time. Not as animals, but as highly trained, highly skilled officers. "These dogs are worth more than your car," the officer added. "Each one costs over $60,000 to train. They don't make mistakes. They don't start fights." His voice sharpened, "But they end them cleanly." One man gulped. Another took a shaky step backward. The leader looked down, his jaw trembling despite his attempts to mask it. The officer turned back to Maya. "And you?" His expression softened with admiration. "You handled this situation exactly how a trained handler would. You kept your cool. You gave the right commands. You prevented these idiots from getting hurt worse than they deserved." Maya nodded slightly, though emotion tightened her throat. Zeus looked up at her, reading her calm, ready to respond to whatever she needed next. The officer faced the men once more. "You messed with a woman you thought was alone," he said coldly. "But she wasn't alone." He pointed at the 3 dogs, standing like silent soldiers. "She had a whole tactical unit watching her back." The senior officer's final words hung in the air like a gavel strike. The men shifted uneasily, their bravado dissolving under the crushing weight of truth and law. Zeus, Phantom, and Fury stood unmoving, their stillness more intimidating than any growl. Every officer on the scene could see it. These men had crossed the wrong person on the wrong day, guarded by the wrong dogs to mess with. "Cuff them," the senior officer ordered. The line of patrol officers surged forward in a smooth, coordinated sweep. The younger men raised their hands immediately, fear overriding any foolish ideas of resistance. One officer yanked the man with the tire iron to his feet, twisting his wrist behind his back as the cuffs clicked shut. Another officer grabbed a man who tried to step away, pushing him against the hood of a patrol car. The man didn't even argue. His eyes were locked on Phantom, who watched him with unsettling intelligence. The tattooed leader hesitated just half a second too long. Zeus took a single step forward, posture tall, chest lifted, a silent promise that one wrong twitch would be answered without hesitation. That was enough. The leader dropped to his knees, hands behind his head. Okay, he muttered, breathing hard. Officers swarmed around him, locking his wrists behind his back. As each man was secured, Zeus adjusted his stance, lowering his guard slightly but keeping his head high. Phantom circled left, making sure no one tried to slip behind a patrol car. Fury stayed near Maya, eyes scanning every movement like a vigilant shadow. Their discipline didn't just impress the officers, it stunned them. One officer nodded toward the dogs. "They're holding formation even now," he murmured. Another whispered, "I've never seen control like that outside of SWAT demos." Maya heard it, pride swelling deep in her chest. These dogs didn't just protect her. They validated everything she had trained for, everything she worked toward. A crowd that had gathered at the edge of the alley watched as the men were lined up against the patrol cars, hands cuffed, heads down. Phones recorded. People murmured. A few clapped quietly, relieved to see justice unfolding right there on the asphalt. The man with the tire iron shook his head in disbelief. "All this because of some dogs," he muttered bitterly. Maya stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "No," she corrected, "because you chose the wrong person to intimidate." Zeus's tail wagged just once, subtle and proud, before he returned to his perfectly trained stance. The officers began reading the men their rights, the final confirmation that the danger had passed. But the story was far from over. As the last man was pushed into the back of a patrol car, the tension in the air finally began to thin. The alley, once charged with danger and dominance, now hummed with the soft static of radios and the distant echo of sirens fading away. But Zeus, Phantom, and Fury didn't relax. Not yet. Their bodies remained locked in protection mode, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every door. They weren't waiting for orders from the officers. They were waiting for her. Maya stepped forward, her heartbeat finally slowing from its battle-ready pace. She looked at her three partners, her silent protectors, and felt the weight of everything they had just done for her. Zeus's chest rose and fell in disciplined breaths. Phantom's gaze darted across the scene like a tactical sweep. Fury stayed closest to her, tail stiff, not willing to let danger creep up behind her ever again. They had done their job. They had exceeded it. She crouched down slightly, letting her voice soften into a tone they knew by heart. "All right, boys. At ease." 3 transformations happened at once. Zeus's muscles loosened first, his stern posture melting into something calmer. Phantom blinked slowly, his ears relaxing from their sharp angles. Fury let out the smallest sigh, a soft, relieved puff of air that only a trained handler would ever notice. They stepped closer to her, forming a loose circle instead of a defensive one, touching their noses gently against her hands, her knees, her boots. They weren't soldiers right now. They were partners, checking on the person they had sworn to protect. Maya placed a hand on Zeus's massive head, stroking down the line of his neck with gratitude that trembled at the edges. "You did amazing," she whispered. Zeus closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. Phantom nudged her arm, seeking his turn. Fury pressed his forehead gently against her leg, grounding her with the warmth of his loyalty. Across the alley, officers paused in their tasks, watching the moment unfold. They exchanged looks, respectful, almost emotional. One officer murmured, "They're not just trained. They love her." Another nodded. "That's why they're so good." A small crowd beyond the police line began to clap, tentative at first, then growing. Someone called out, "Good dogs!" Another shouted, "She handled that like a pro!" Maya felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't stand. Not yet. Her focus remained on the dogs, the ones who had held the line when words, warnings, and fear failed. She smiled, finally exhaling the anxiety she'd held since the men first appeared. "Let's go home soon," she whispered, and Zeus, Phantom, and Fury, three of the most elite canines in the region, wagged their tails for the first time since the nightmare began. As the tension fully eased from the air, officers began wrapping up the scene, collecting statements, filing reports, and confirming the men's charges. But in the midst of the activity, one officer broke away from the cluster and approached Maya with deliberate steps. He was the senior officer, the one who had recognized Zeus, Phantom, and Fury instantly. His expression was no longer stern, but warm, impressed, almost proud. "You handled yourself exceptionally well," he said. "Most people freeze, some panic. But you," he paused, giving her a nod of respect. "You stayed calm under pressure. You protected yourself and your team." Maya tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of the adrenaline still lingering in her veins. "I just did what I had to do," she said quietly. Zeus sat beside her, chest puffed out, as if he understood every word of praise being directed at his handler. Phantom stood on her other side, his tail sweeping the ground in slow, controlled movements. Fury leaned gently against her leg, grounding her once more. Another officer joined them, youthful and wide-eyed. "I've seen K9 demos," he said, shaking his head in awe. "But what your dogs did today, that was on a different level. That wasn't training. That was loyalty." He pointed at the compartment. "You're transporting some of the best dogs in the country, but honestly, they don't act like this for just anyone." Maya smiled softly, glancing down at her three partners. "We trust each other," she replied. "That's all." The senior officer crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered becoming a full K9 handler?" he asked. "The way you command them, the way they respond to you, it's rare. Most handlers train for years before they reach this kind of bond." He paused. "We could use people like you." The question caught her off guard. She had always imagined herself behind the wheel, transporting, supporting, assisting. But today had awakened something deeper. Confidence, purpose, a recognition of the role she naturally stepped into without hesitation. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but I never felt ready." The officer gestured toward the scene, the arrested men, the grateful crowd, the poised K9s at her side. "After what I saw today," he said firmly, "you're more ready than half the people in our unit." Maya's chest warmed at the compliment. Zeus nudged her hand, as if seconding the officer's opinion. Phantom and Fury gave small tail wags, reading the shift in her emotion. "Maybe one day," she said, her voice calm but filled with quiet determination. And the dogs, hearing her tone, straightened with pride, as if they already knew that her future held more than steering a van. It held leadership, purpose, and a bond that no danger could ever break. When the last patrol car rolled out of the alley and the distant sirens faded into nothing but memory, the warehouse district finally fell quiet again. The danger was gone. The men were in custody. The officers were finishing their reports. Yet Maya didn't move right away. She stood beside her van, her hand resting gently on Zeus's head, feeling the soft rise and fall of his breath. Phantom lay at her feet, eyes half closed, but still alert. Fury sat pressed against her leg, refusing to break contact for even a heartbeat. After everything that had happened, after every second of fear, adrenaline, and chaos, this moment felt like warmth returning to a frozen place. She opened the K9 compartment door fully, letting the dogs climb inside one by one. Zeus stepped in first, glancing back at her as if making sure she was truly safe. Phantom followed, slow and graceful, pausing long enough to bump his head against her knee. Fury lingered the longest, his eyes soft, full of an affection only a handler could understand. Maya scratched behind his ear, whispering, "Good job today, buddy." Only then did he climb into the van, curling up beside the others. Maya closed the door gently, not with fear, but with gratitude. She walked around to the driver's side, the fading golden light casting long shadows behind her. Officers nearby gave her nods of respect, small salutes, and a few murmured compliments. Maya returned each gesture with quiet humility. She wasn't the hero here. The heroes were waiting in the back of her van, paws dusty, coats ruffled, hearts steady. As she climbed into the driver's seat, her thoughts drifted to the moment she feared the most. The moment she believed those men might overpower her, outnumber her, corner her. But she had been wrong. She had never truly been alone. Even when she felt isolated, intimidated, or powerless, 3 loyal guardians stood ready to defend her without hesitation. She started the engine, and the hum vibrated through the van like a familiar heartbeat. Through the small grate window, she could see Zeus lift his head, Phantom reposition himself, and Fury settle comfortably. They were relaxed now. But she knew if anything ever threatened her again, they would rise in an instant. As she pulled onto the open road, a small smile curved across her lips. People think heroes wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they have paws. Sometimes they protect without being asked. Sometimes they choose you long before you realize you needed them. And Maya drove on, knowing one truth more clearly than ever. She didn't just transport police dogs. She traveled with family, and nothing in the world was stronger than the bond they shared.